My name is Judith Anderson. I'm 42 years old, and I've spent my entire adult life managing other people's risks, though I never imagined the biggest one would come from the man I married. For 20 years, I built a life with Evan, my husband, who used to charm everyone he met. I'm a senior risk consultant for an investment firm. I make decisions based on data, not emotion. Evan was different. Passionate, carefree, magnetic. He taught fitness classes and said I made life too serious. I thought we balanced each other. But balance, I've learned, only lasts as long as both people are holding the rope. When our daughter Natalie left for college 5 years ago, Evan slowly stopped working. He said he needed time to rethink his goals. But what he really meant was, he liked the comfort of our home, my income, and my quiet tolerance. I justified it, told myself he supported me in other ways, cooking errands, companionship. But that was self-delusion. The truth is, he was bored. And boredom, I've come to realize, is a breeding ground for betrayal. From the outside, our marriage looked polished. Dinner parties, gym memberships, a house that smelled like fresh lilies and quiet success. But inside, something had rotted. We talked less, smiled on schedule, slept in separate rhythms. Still, I told myself we were fine until the night I installed the new home security system. It was supposed to be a simple upgrade. I had just finished reviewing a client case about internal theft and decided to practice what I preach: trust but verify. The system had motion sensors, cameras, and audio backup, perfect for someone who lived by contingency planning. When I played back the footage to test the angles, I heard something that froze my blood. Evan's voice. He was in my home office, the very space where I worked late every night. I recognized his low chuckle, the one he used when trying to charm someone. But it wasn't for me. Yeah, Chloe, she's got it all tucked in that safe, 100 grand, maybe more. Calls it her emergency fund. Once we grab it, we're gone. You and me. Fresh start. There was a pause, then a woman's laugh, light, breathy, full of conspiracy. God, I can't wait to be free of this boring life. The word boring hit me like a slap. For a long minute, I sat completely still, the audio looping in my mind like a bad melody. Then instinctively, my training kicked in. My heart was racing, but my thoughts were sharp, mechanical. This wasn't just infidelity, it was larceny. And if Evan thought I'd react like a broken-hearted wife, crying, begging, or screaming, he'd miscalculated. I muted the audio and stared at the quiet, tidy home office around me. My framed certifications lined the wall, every one of them earned through caution and precision. I thought of the irony. I'd spent 2 decades identifying potential loss, analyzing risk exposure, building safeguards, and I'd failed to hedge against him. That night I didn't confront Evan. I didn't even look at him differently. I smiled, set the table, poured his wine, listened to him talk about clients and plans. Inside, I was already drafting my counter strategy. The first rule of crisis management: never react emotionally. The second: gather data before you strike. He wanted a new life with my money. Fine. I'd give him one, just not the life he imagined. As he leaned over the sink, later humming, while rinsing the dishes, I stood in the doorway and watched him. My husband, my betrayer, the soon-to-be architect of his own downfall. He didn't know it yet, but I was done being the risk he managed. From now on, I was the one managing his. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her laugh again. Chloe's, that giddy, breathless sound of someone tasting danger for the first time. By morning, my mind had shifted fully into professional mode. I was no longer a wife. I was an analyst with a live case. The objective neutralized the threat without detection. Evan left early, claiming he had a client at the gym. I waited until the garage door closed, then poured myself black coffee and sat at my desk opening my financial dashboard. It was all there, the emergency fund I had built over years, tucked safely in a steel vault just 3 rooms away. He thought he could strip it from me. I decided to make that impossible. Step 1 was extraction. I withdrew the entire $100,000 from the bank that afternoon. The teller smiled politely, probably assuming I was making some extravagant purchase, if only she knew. When I got home, I lined the cash neatly on my dining table. The smell of fresh bills filled the air, sharp, metallic, almost predatory. I photographed everything: the stacks, the serial numbers, the withdrawal slip. Then I deposited the same amount into a new private account under my name only. Step 2 required creativity. I found an online supplier that produced prop money for film studios, perfect replicas of U.S. currency legal to own as long as you never tried to spend them. Each bill bore faint, tiny print for motion picture use only. I ordered $100,000 worth express shipping. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I acted normal texting Evan about dinner plans, pretending to laugh at his lazy jokes while secretly checking my email for the shipping update every few hours. When the package finally arrived, I locked myself in my home office under the pretense of working late. I opened the cardboard box and ran my fingers over the crisp counterfeit stacks. They looked real enough to fool anyone, especially a man whose expertise ended at lifting weights and charming bored women. Under the white glow of my desk lamp, I opened the safe and removed the empty velvet pouch that had once held the real bills. My heartbeat steadied. My movements became surgical. Stack by stack, I replaced every real dollar with flawless fakes. Then I closed the safe and entered a new combination. Before I stepped away, I whispered something I didn't fully intend to say out loud. "You want to rob me, Evan? Let's see how well you handle fake returns." After locking the door, I backed up the camera footage and transferred the audio of his conversation with Chloe to an encrypted drive. I added the bank withdrawal slip, the serial number photos, and the prop money receipt, all labeled, time-stamped, and sealed in a folder marked Risk Mitigation Case EL. The final step was testing my own composure. Over the next week, I lived like an actress in her own play. I smiled at Evan's morning routines, the way he'd scroll through his phone, smirking at messages he thought I didn't notice. At dinner, I listened to him talk about new business ventures, probably rehearsing the life he'd live with her once he had my money. But one night, as I was turning off the kitchen light, I heard him humming again. That same tune he'd hummed on the night I discovered everything. I paused in the dark and watched him through the reflection on the glass. He was checking the safe, running his fingers over it like a child guarding a secret. And he smiled. The kind of smile that said he truly believed he was untouchable. Inside, a part of me twisted with both fury and exhilaration. It was working. I had given him every opportunity to damn himself, and soon he would. When I finally went to bed, I lay awake beside him, his breathing slow, peaceful, unaware. The ceiling fan whispered above us, slicing the silence into thin ribbons. If he had turned toward me that moment and said, "I love you," I don't know what I would have done. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. But he didn't. He just slept dreaming of freedom bought with stolen lies. And me, I stared into the dark, wide awake, planning the moment the thief would trap himself. "Your move, darling," I whispered. "Your last move." It happened on a Tuesday. I was in a glass conference room, halfway through presenting a quarterly risk audit to a client, when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Work demanded focus, but something in me knew. My gut, that quiet internal radar honed by years of watching human behavior, went still. When the meeting ended, I picked up my phone. One unread message. Evan cleaned out the safe, starting fresh with Chloe. "Don't try to find me." For a long, breathless moment, I just stared at the words. Each letter looked detached, almost polite, like he was sending a vacation notice instead of confessing to grand larceny and adultery. My pulse slowed. The air around me felt thinner. Then, without hesitation, I typed my reply. "Me, enjoy the cash." I hit send. My thumb didn't even tremble. The receptionist knocked gently on the glass door, asking if I needed water. I smiled and said I'm fine. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was calm, detached, almost clinical. Evan had no idea that his betrayal had detonated a mine I'd placed myself. While he was driving toward whatever fantasy he thought awaited him and Chloe, I initiated my own sequence of responses, methodical, efficient, almost mechanical. Step 1. Credit cards. He was an authorized user on 3 of my high-limit accounts. Within minutes, I logged in and removed his name from all of them. Click, click, click. 3 lines severed, 3 lifelines gone. Step 2, locks. I called a locksmith I'd prearranged under the guise of a security upgrade. Every door, every window, every code changed. The new key turned with a satisfying click, one that sounded exactly like finality. Step 3, legal. I forwarded a screenshot of Evan's text to my attorney, Austin Cortez. He specialized in financial litigation, but had a strong streak of moral fury I appreciated. My message was brief. "Austin, please begin divorce proceedings immediately. Grounds, abandonment, theft, infidelity, evidence attached." He called within an hour, his tone careful but firm. "Judith, you knew this was coming, didn't you?" "Yes," I said softly, "and I planned for it." Step 4. Passwords. Every shared account, streaming email, online, stores, even the Wi-Fi was under my name. I changed them all, each password a variation of a single phrase, "I saw you coming." By nightfall, my world was quieter. Evan was gone. His half of the closet empty, his favorite watch, missing a note left on the counter. Don't make this harder, Judith. You'll be fine. I almost laughed. He was still underestimating me, even in his goodbye. As the sun set, I walked into the home office, the place where this all began. The air smelled of lemon polish and old fear. The safe stood open, empty, of course. I looked inside anyway. The counterfeit bills were gone. The velvet lining showed faint dust where they had rested. I felt no grief, no rage, only a strange calm, like the eye of a hurricane finally passing overhead. I closed the safe gently and whispered thank you, because now everything was in motion. Before bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, staring at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, Evan and Chloe were celebrating. I could picture it perfectly, the hotel room, the champagne, the laughter, the illusion of victory. And soon the shock on their faces when reality hit. Still, there was one thing I hadn't accounted for: how empty the house would feel. Every creak of wood, every flicker of light felt like the echo of a life that used to be shared. I walked to our daughter's old room, neat, untouched, still smelling faintly of her vanilla shampoo. I sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the framed family photo on the dresser, the three of us smiling, Evan's hand on my shoulder. Natalie's laughter caught mid-motion. I picked it up, stared for a long time, and then placed it face down. "Goodbye, Evan," I said quietly. "You wanted freedom. Here it is." Then I turned off the lights and went to bed in a house that finally belonged only to me. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, my doorbell rang. The sound of the doorbell cut through the silence like a blade. It was a steady, deliberate ring, not the impatient tap of a neighbor or delivery driver. I set down my coffee, straightened my robe, and opened the door. 2 people stood on the porch, a man and a woman, both in pressed dark suits. Their eyes were alert, scanning, not curious. The man spoke first, his voice calm but official. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm Agent Kyler. This is Agent Chen. We're with the United States Secret Service. May we come in?" For a second I froze, not out of guilt but anticipation. It had begun. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Please." They entered the living room, the one Evan and I had remodeled together 2 years ago, back when I still believed that shared furniture meant shared dreams. The agent's shoes left no marks on the polished hardwood. They moved like people who had walked through too many crime scenes. Agent Kyler's gaze swept the room before he spoke. "We're here regarding your husband, Evan Anderson." I folded my arms lightly, feigning confusion. "My ex-husband, technically. What about him?" Agent Chen took out a small notepad. "He and a woman named Chloe Rossi were arrested this morning in Las Vegas. They attempted to purchase a vehicle using a substantial amount of cash. The bills were counterfeit. There it was, the explosion I'd planned detonating exactly on schedule." I tilted my head slightly. "Counterfeit." "Yes, ma'am," Kyler continued. "A total of $100,000 in fake hundreds." When questioned, Mr. Anderson stated the money came from your personal safe. I let a pause hang in the air long enough for both agents to feel it. Then I spoke softly. He wasn't lying about that part. Their eyes sharpened. I gestured toward the sofa. "Please have a seat. I'll explain." They sat, Kyler upright, Chen slightly leaning forward, pen poised. I took the armchair across from them and began the story piece by piece, exactly as I'd lived it. The discovery of his affair, the recorded phone call, the withdrawal of the real money, the replacement with legally owned prop currency. Halfway through, Agent Chen interrupted. "You're telling us you intentionally replaced the cash with prop bills before your husband stole it?" "Correct." "Why?" "Because I knew he would." The silence that followed was electric. I continued, calmly presenting each piece of evidence: the audio recording of Evan and Chloe planning the theft, the bank withdrawal slip, the receipt from the prop money company, the photos of serial numbers, the text message where he confessed by implication. When I handed Agent Kyler the printed documents, his composure wavered, just slightly. "You kept meticulous records." "I manage risk for a living," I said. This was just another portfolio to balance. Agent Chen exchanged a glance with her partner, then looked back at me. "Mrs. Anderson, you do understand that the possession of counterfeit currency is not illegal unless I attempt to use it," I interrupted gently. "I never did. The fake money never left my safe until it was stolen by someone else. I am the victim of theft, not the distributor of counterfeit goods." Kyler leaned back, rubbing his jaw, studying me with new respect. "You planned this down to the decimal." I met his gaze. "No, Agent Kyler. I adapted. There's a difference." Agent Chen's tone softened slightly, though her words didn't. "You realize what you did could have gone wrong. If he'd hurt you, if he'd suspected." "He didn't," I said quietly, "because he never saw me as a threat." For the next 20 minutes, they asked their questions, and I answered every one. There was no hesitation, no nervous laughter, no cracks in the timeline. Everything I presented aligned perfectly. Finally, Kyler closed his folder with a slow exhale. Mrs. Anderson, our preliminary assessment is that you are not criminally liable. You've been thorough, excessively so, in fact. Thank you, I said with the faintest smile. I take that as a compliment. They stood. Agent Chen lingered by the door, her expression unreadable. You're brilliant, she said softly. But brilliance like this, it can burn you if you're not careful. I held her gaze. Sometimes it's the only way to survive the fire. When the door closed behind them, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The house was silent again, but this time the quiet felt different. I should have felt victorious, vindicated, safe. Instead, I felt hollow. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving only the echo of what I'd lost, not Evan, not the money, but the illusion that love could ever be risk-free. I sat back on the couch, staring at the framed mirror above the mantel. My reflection looked composed, unbroken. But my eyes looked like someone who had just watched her own soul execute a perfect crime. The day after the agents left, the silence in the house turned heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The phone rang before noon. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. Same number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Judith. The voice on the other end was frantic, hoarse from crying. It's Evan's mother. I said nothing. You have to help him. He's been arrested. They're saying federal charges, something about counterfeit money. He told us you set him up. My God, Judith. How could you do that to your own husband? I took a slow breath. He did that to himself. He made a mistake. She sobbed. You know how he is impulsive, trusting the wrong people. He trusted himself, I interrupted. That was the mistake. There was a long silence, then a soft, broken whisper. You're colder than I ever thought possible. Click. She hung up. I stood there for a while, the dial tone humming, like static in my chest. Then I poured myself tea and watched the sunlight crawl across the floor. I didn't feel cold. I felt tired. 2 hours later, a new voicemail notification blinked on my phone. Evan. His voice was trembling, desperate, stripped of its usual arrogance. Judith, please, I know you're angry, but you can fix this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You knew the money was fake, right? Just tell them you were testing me or something. You ruined my life. The rest dissolved into sobs and curses. No apology, no accountability, just the same chorus of blame. I replayed it once, then forwarded it to my attorney, Austin Cortez. His reply came minutes later, file for a restraining order immediately, and Judith save everything, every message. The next few days blurred together in a strange rhythm of phone calls and statements. The Secret Service confirmed my evidence. The FBI verified the source of the prop money. The case against Evan was airtight. Then the secondary shockwave hit his family. Evan's father called me, his voice tight with restrained fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? My son's reputation, his career. I laughed quietly but without humor. Career he hasn't worked in years. He was lost, his father snapped. You're supposed to help your spouse, not destroy them. I did help him, I said. I gave him a chance to choose honesty. He chose theft. You could have warned us. And ruined the surprise, I replied coldly. A heavy silence followed, then the click of disconnection. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair, staring at my own reflection. The woman looking back at me was calm, too calm. My friends used to say my strength was admirable. It didn't feel admirable now. It felt isolating. Somewhere deep down, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Not legally, I knew every move I'd made was defensible, but emotionally. The revenge had been clean, silent, perfect. But it had cost me something I couldn't name. The next morning, Austin called with an update. Judith, the district attorney's office, wants to proceed quickly. With your documentation, the case is strong. They may offer him a plea deal. And Chloe, she's flipping, he said flatly. Cooperating with the feds. Claims she didn't know the money was fake. She's painting herself as another one of his victims. I looked out the window. Rain had started to fall, turning the glass into a shifting mirror. Maybe she was, I said quietly. Austin hesitated. You sound conflicted. No, I said, just human. That night, I found myself standing in our bedroom doorway. Half of the closet still hung empty. On the top shelf, a single shoebox remained, one Evan must have forgotten. Inside were old photos, our honeymoon. Natalie's first birthday, Christmas mornings, before everything turned hollow. I sat on the edge of the bed, thumbing through the memories, wondering when love had mutated into strategy. Somewhere between forgiveness and foresight, I had stopped being a wife and become a tactician. When I finally put the box away, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not joy, not triumph, just release. I turned off the light and whispered to the dark. He taught me what risk is. I taught him what consequence means. 8 months later, the world had finally gone quiet again. The court dates, the depositions, the long hours of lawyers, debating words like intent and ownership. They had all faded into the background hum of a story already decided. Evan took a plea deal. He didn't fight it. He couldn't. The evidence was irrefutable, his voice on the recording. The surveillance footage from the Las Vegas car dealership, the text he'd sent me himself. He pled guilty to attempted fraud and theft by deception. His sentence was reduced for cooperating with the authorities, though cooperation mostly meant throwing Chloe under the bus. Chloe's testimony was sharper than anyone expected. She admitted she'd known about the money, but claimed she didn't know it was fake. She painted Evan as manipulative, controlling, and emotionally abusive. The irony didn't escape me. He had tried to use that exact narrative about me. In the end, Evan got 2 years of probation and a permanent criminal record. Chloe avoided prison but lost her professional license. I heard through Austin that she'd moved back to her parents' house in Nevada, working part-time at a coffee shop. Evan's family went silent. They didn't attend the hearings. They didn't send letters. Perhaps they finally realized the truth, or maybe they simply couldn't bear the humiliation. When the divorce was finalized, the judge didn't even hesitate. Given the evidence of betrayal, theft, and financial malfeasance, he said the court rules in favor of the petitioner, Mrs. Anderson. Everything, the house, the investments, even the car I used to let Evan drive was mine. The law, for once, had matched justice. Still, as I stood outside the courthouse that afternoon, I didn't feel victorious. Just hollow. Like I had crossed an invisible line I could never uncross. Austin walked beside me, carrying the final paperwork. "You did the right thing," he said. "You protected yourself." Maybe I replied. "But right doesn't always feel good, does it?" He gave a small, sympathetic smile. "No, it usually doesn't." That night I poured myself a glass of wine and stood in the living room one last time. The furniture was gone, the boxes sealed and stacked. Every echo reminded me of what had been dismantled here, not just a marriage, but a version of myself. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope postmarked from Nevada. No return name, just a neat, looping handwriting I didn't recognize until I opened it. Inside was a postcard, a picture of the Las Vegas Strip. On the back, a short message in black ink. "He lied to both of us. I'm sorry. Chloe." I stared at the words for a long time. There was no bitterness, no sarcasm, just a quiet, exhausted apology. I slipped the postcard into a drawer and left it there. Some truths don't need to be displayed. A week later, I sold the house and bought a one-way ticket to Southeast Asia, a trip I'd once suggested years ago, the one Evan had dismissed as too rustic. Now it was mine alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Natalie. She knew I needed space, and for once I allowed myself to take it. The first night abroad, I sat by the ocean in Thailand, the waves lapping at the shore, under a sky so wide it made me feel small in the best possible way. I watched a fisherman mend his net by lantern light, patient, meticulous, careful with every knot. And I thought maybe that's what healing is, not forgetting, not erasing, just slowly mending the tears. I raised my glass toward the horizon and whispered, "To clean breaks." The sea didn't answer, but the wind did a soft rush that felt almost like absolution. Revenge, I realized, wasn't the opposite of love. It was what remained when love rotted and something stronger had to take its place. It wasn't fire, it was gravity, and I had simply stepped aside and let him fall. 6 months passed. The sound of my old life had faded into memory courtrooms, lawyers' headlines. Even Evan's name had lost its sting. I was sitting in a cafe on the coast of Hoi An, Vietnam, where the river meets the sea. The mornings here smell like coffee and salt water, and the air hums with the sound of fishermen pulling in their nets. Every sunrise I walked barefoot on the sand, learning what it meant to exist without calculation. No plans, no charts, no risk assessments, just motion, just breath. I had rented a small apartment above a tailor shop owned by an elderly couple who barely spoke English. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. To them, I was just Judith, the quiet woman who rode on her balcony at dawn and paid rent early. Some evenings, I'd sit at the harbor and watch couples laugh over street food. Sometimes I wondered if Evan ever thought of me sitting in that same silence he left behind. But then I realized it didn't matter. His story had ended long before mine truly began. One morning, a little girl approached my table at the cafe. She couldn't have been more than 6. She dropped a small coin on the ground near my feet, picked it up and held it out to me with both hands. "You dropped this," she said in broken English. I smiled, shaking my head. "It's yours." She looked confused, then ran off, her laughter carried away by the breeze. I turned the coin over in my palm, dull, ordinary, insignificant. Yet somehow it felt like the universe had just handed me a receipt for everything I'd lost and gained. Honesty, I thought. The smallest currency and the hardest to earn back. That night I opened my journal, the one I'd started after arriving here. I'd filled pages with fragments of thoughts, half confessions, quiet realizations. On the first page, I'd written a single line months ago: "Risk management begins where trust ends." Now I added another beneath it. "But maybe the safest investment is finally myself." The fan whirred above me, stirring the warm air. I closed the journal and leaned back in my chair, listening to the distant laughter below the balcony voices of strangers free and unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't strategy, wasn't revenge, wasn't relief. It was peace. Not the absence of pain, but the quiet understanding that some endings aren't punishments, they're permissions. Permission to let go, to breathe again, to start fresh, not from escape, but from choice. I looked out at the horizon where the sea met the fading light and whispered to the wind one